My mother, my aunt, my uncle, my two cousins. The people who had gathered around our kitchen table every Sunday and told me, in so many ways, that I was lucky to have them. I believed them for a long time. I was 22 when I stopped. There are things about growing up in Sudbury that people from bigger cities don't understand. It's not a small town. There are grocery stores and traffic lights and a Costco. But it has the feeling of one. Everyone knows everyone's business, and if they don't, they find out. My family had been in the same neighborhood for 3 generations. My grandmother had raised 4 kids in that house on Regent Street. My mother grew up there. My aunt moved 2 streets over when she married. By the time I came along, the family had roots so deep and so tangled that the idea of leaving felt like pulling up the floor. I don't think I ever questioned it. Not until I had to. My name is Simone. I'm 31 now, and I live in Ottawa with a small apartment, a ridiculous number of houseplants, and a life I built entirely by myself. What I'm about to tell you isn't a dramatic story in the way most people expect dramatic stories to be. There was no single explosion, no screaming match that ended everything. It was quieter than that, and in some ways that made it harder. Because you can't point to one moment and say, that's it. That's when it broke. You can only look back and realize the cracks had been there for years, and you'd spent most of your life pretending you didn't see them. I want to tell you about the Sunday dinners first, because that's where most of it happened. My mother cooked every week, pot roast in the winter, barbecue in the summer, always enough for 12, even when there were only 8 of us. My aunt and uncle came with my cousins. My grandmother, who we all called Mimère, sat at the head of the table because that was where she'd always sat. And nobody had ever questioned it. I set the table from the time I was 7. I cleared it from the time I was 9. By the time I was 15, I was doing the dishes alone while everyone else moved to the living room to watch television. I didn't mind it, at first. I liked having something to do. I liked the feeling of being useful. What I didn't notice, not until much later, was that no one ever offered to help. Not once. Not my cousins, who were the same age as me. Not my aunt, who would have been perfectly capable. Not my mother, who had cooked for 3 hours. Everyone just assumed I would handle it. And I did. And so the assumption calcified into expectation, and the expectation calcified into something that didn't even have a name. It was just the way things were. The money piece came later. I got a part-time job at 16, at a pharmacy on LaSalle. It was minimum wage, but I was careful with it. I opened a savings account. I put in $50 a month, then 80, then 100 when my hours went up. By the time I finished high school, I had just over $4,000 saved. I was proud of that. I didn't talk about it much, but I was proud. The first time money was borrowed, I was 17. My uncle's car needed repairs. Something about the transmission, and he was short by $300. My mother came to me quietly, the way she did when she needed something, with her hands folded and her voice soft, and she said it would only be a few weeks. I gave her the $300. I don't need to tell you it wasn't paid back in a few weeks. It was paid back eventually, 7 months later, and without any acknowledgement that anything unusual had occurred. I told myself it was fine. The second time, I was 19. My cousin, the older one, my aunt's son, had gotten into some kind of trouble I was never fully told about. They needed $800. My mother didn't come to me quietly this time. She came with my aunt, both of them standing in my bedroom doorway, and the way they looked at me made it feel like saying no would be a moral failing. I gave them the $800. That one was never paid back. I want to be clear about something. My family wasn't cruel. That's what makes this hard to explain to people. They weren't mean to me in obvious ways. They didn't yell or hit or say ugly things. What they did was subtler. They expected. They assumed. They framed every ask as a family obligation and every boundary I tried to set as selfishness. And they did it so consistently and with such confidence that I started to believe them. When I got a scholarship at 19 to study at Carleton, a full scholarship, not partial, full, my mother told people about it as though it had happened to her. When I mentioned I was thinking about moving to Ottawa for school, my aunt said, "Well, who's going to look after things here?" Nobody said congratulations. Not my mother. Not my aunt. Not my uncle. My cousin sent me a thumbs-up emoji, which I suppose counts. The person who said congratulations was Mimère. She called me into her room the night I told the family about the scholarship. She was 81, small, with hands that shook a little when she poured her tea. She sat me down and took my hands in hers and said, in French, "Moptight, you worked for this. Don't let anyone make you small." Then she pressed an envelope into my hands. Inside was $400 in 20s. She said she'd been saving it for me. I cried. She told me to stop, not unkindly. She said there was no point crying in front of people who wouldn't understand why. That was the last real conversation I remember having with someone in my family that felt like it was actually about me. The moment I've thought about most, in the years since, happened in the kitchen. Not during a Sunday dinner. It was a Tuesday in February, my last year at home before I left for school. I was 21. I'd been working double shifts at the pharmacy to top up my savings before the move, and I'd come home tired and hungry to find that my cousin had been staying with us for 3 weeks, without anyone telling me. He was sleeping on the pull-out couch. He was there when I left for work at 7 in the morning, and there when I came back at 10 at night. He ate the leftovers I'd been saving. He used my shampoo without asking. I didn't say anything about the shampoo. I know that sounds small, but it was one of about 40 things I didn't say anything about, and they were all adding up in a way I couldn't explain without sounding petty. What broke it was the Sunday before I was supposed to move. I was in the kitchen after dinner, doing the dishes. Everyone else was watching something in the living room. My mother came in and told me that my cousin needed money for a bus pass. He was looking for work, she said, and the new month's pass was $156, and she didn't have it right now. I put down the dish I was holding. I turned around, I said, "Mom, I move in 10 days. I've been working doubles all month. I've been doing the dishes every Sunday since I was 9. I drive cousin to his appointments when uncle can't. I lent the family money 3 times and only got paid back once. I'm 21 years old. What has this family done for me?" The kitchen went very quiet. My mother looked at me like I'd said something in a language she didn't recognize. Then she said, "I didn't realize you were keeping score." I stood there for a moment. Then I finished the dishes, because I didn't know what else to do with my hands. Then I went to my room and I sat on the edge of my bed in the dark and I thought about what she'd said. Keeping score. As though noticing that things were unfair was itself the unfairness. As though the problem wasn't that I had been carrying things alone for years. The problem was that I'd finally said so out loud. I went to Mimère's room before bed. I told her I was leaving. I told her what she already knew, that I was moving to Ottawa in 10 days. But I also told her the other thing, that I didn't know when I'd be back, that I needed to be somewhere I could breathe. She held my hand for a long time and didn't say anything, and then she said, "Write to me." I promised I would. I moved to Ottawa on a Thursday in March. I had my savings, my scholarship, a duffel bag, and a box of kitchen things I'd bought myself from the thrift store on Elm. My mother stood in the driveway and said, "Be careful on the 69. She didn't hug me. I don't think she knew how to, in that moment. I don't think I wanted her to. I didn't call when I got there. I told myself I'd call when I was settled. I waited a week, then another. Then my mother called me and said my cousin needed a reference for a job and could I pretend to be his former employer. And I said no. And she said I was being difficult, and I hung up and didn't call back. That was how it started. Not a declaration, not a letter, not a formal goodbye, just a phone call I didn't return. And then another. And then the quiet that follows when you stop trying to explain yourself to people who aren't listening. The first, to be honest, the hardest. Because it would be easy to tell you, it felt like freedom right away. And that would be a lie. It felt like silence. Not peaceful silence, the uncomfortable kind, the kind that makes you wonder whether you did something wrong. I would be making dinner in my small apartment near the glebe, and suddenly, it's Sunday, and feel a kind of phantom guilt, like a limb that wasn't there anymore. I wrote to Mimère twice a month. She wrote back in her careful, shaky French. She told me about the garden, about the neighbors, about what was on television. She never relayed messages from the family. I never asked her to. It was our arrangement without either of us having said so. In my second year, I found a job at a small accounting firm. I wasn't qualified yet. I was still doing my CPA coursework. But they hired me as an administrative assistant and let me learn alongside the junior accountants. My supervisor, a woman named Harriet, had started the same way 20 years earlier. She brought me into client meetings and let me sit in the back and take notes. She told me once, after I'd stayed late to fix a spreadsheet error that wasn't mine, that the difference between people who get ahead and people who don't is almost never talent. It's who decides they're worth investing in. Then she added, "You should probably go home and eat something." I thought about Mimère when she said that. My third year, I passed the first level of my CPA exams. I moved into a better apartment, one with a window in the kitchen and a radiator that actually worked. I had a savings account again. Not huge, but mine, entirely mine, without anyone's name on it but my own. I bought proper furniture instead of things I'd found on the curb. I bought a coffee maker I actually liked. These feel like small things when I list them, but at the time they felt enormous. Because they were proof that I was capable of taking care of myself. That I had always been capable. That the question had never been whether I could do it. The question had just been whether anyone was going to let me find out. I called Mimère on her birthday every year. By the time I was 26, her voice had gotten quieter, more careful. She tired easily. She told me the garden had gotten to be too much, and she'd let the neighbor take it over. I flew back to Sudbury for Christmas that year. My first time back in 4 years, and I stayed in a hotel and visited her every day. She held my hand and looked at me and said, "Tu as l'air bien, you look well." I told her she looked well too. She didn't, quite, but she looked like herself, which is what matters. I didn't see the rest of the family on that trip. My mother knew I was in town. I told Mamere, and Mamere wasn't going to lie, but I didn't reach out and they didn't come to me. I don't know what to make of that, even now. Part of me had expected them to try. Part of me was relieved when they didn't. I flew back to Ottawa on December 27th and went back to work on the 2nd of January and didn't think about Sudbury again for months. That's not entirely true, but almost. You get practiced at it eventually. The not thinking. Mamere died in April 2 years later. She was 87. Her heart, which had been sturdy for so long, finally stopped in the night quietly at home. My cousin texted me. Not my mother, my cousin. Mamere passed early this morning. Thought you should know. That was all. I sat with my phone in my hands for a long time. I was at work. I went to the bathroom and sat in a stall, and I let myself be sad for about 10 minutes, which sounds calculated, but was the only way I knew how to do it. Then I washed my face and went back to my desk and finished the day. I went back to Sudbury for the funeral. I stayed in the same hotel. I wore the black dress I'd bought for professional events, and I sat in the third pew, and I listened to the priest talk about a woman he'd known for 40 years, and I thought about all the things he didn't know about her. The way she pressed money into my palm. The way she said, "Don't let anyone make you small." The letters about the garden. After the service, outside the church, my mother came up to me. She looked older. That was the first thing I thought. She looked older and smaller, and she was standing with her hands at her sides like she didn't know what to do with them. She said my name. Then she said, "You look good." I said, "Thank you." She said, "Are you coming to the reception?" I said yes, and that was the whole conversation. That was the reunion after 7 years. "You look good. Are you coming to the reception?" I've thought about it many times since, and I don't think she was being cold. I think she genuinely didn't know what to say. I think the gap had gotten so wide that small talk was the only bridge she could find. And she used it because it was there. I went to the reception. I drank 1 cup of tea. I talked to Mamere's neighbor, who told me about the garden, how Mamere had given her all the seeds before she got too tired to plant them herself. I stayed for 40 minutes. Then I said goodbye to no one in particular, and went back to the hotel, and called my best friend in Ottawa and talked for 2 hours. I drove back the next morning. I didn't think I'd hear from them again. I was wrong. 7 months after the funeral, last November on a Tuesday night, I was making pasta and listening to a podcast. My phone started going off. The first notification was a text from my mother. I glanced at it, put the phone down, and stirred the sauce. The second was a voicemail, then another text. Then a call I didn't answer. Then a voicemail from my aunt, which I hadn't expected. Then a text from my cousin. The younger one this time, the one who'd sent me the news about Mamere. Then another call from my mother. Then a call from a number I didn't recognize that left a voicemail in my uncle's voice. By the time the pasta was ready, I had 11 messages. By 10 o'clock, I had 23. I sat on my couch with my phone face down on the cushion beside me. And I ate my pasta. And I thought about a lot of things. I thought about the Sunday dinners and the dishes. I thought about the $300 for the transmission and the $800 that was never paid back. I thought about the scholarship nobody congratulated me on. I thought about my mother in the driveway, telling me to watch out on the 69, not hugging me. I thought about Mamere, about the $400 in 20s, about her voice saying, "Don't let anyone make you small." I didn't listen to the messages that night. I turned my phone off and went to bed, and I lay there in the dark looking at the ceiling, and I felt something I didn't expect to feel. Not anger, not sadness, mostly just tired. The way you feel at the end of a very long day when someone asks you to do one more thing, and you know you can't. Not tonight, not right now. In the morning, I got up and made coffee and sat at my kitchen table in the early light, and I opened the messages one by one. My mother's first voicemail was short. She said she hoped I was well. She said she'd been thinking about me. She said she had some news and could I please call her back. Her second message was longer. She said that the house on Regent Street, Mamere's house, the house she'd grown up in, had been left to her in the estate, and she was thinking about selling, and she wanted to talk before she did anything. She said she knew things had been difficult. She said she was sorry. She said she didn't want to put anything in a message, but she wanted me to know she'd been doing some thinking. My aunt's message was different. She said she knew we hadn't spoken in a while and that was probably her fault, as much as anyone's. She said she missed me. She actually said that. "I miss you." I had to listen to it twice. My uncle said almost nothing, just that they were all in the same place and they wanted to talk to me, and please call back when I could. My cousin, the younger one, said, "Hey, I know this is weird, but we're all kind of going through it. I'd like to talk sometime if you're open to it. No pressure." I sat with those messages for 3 days, not because I was avoiding them. I mean, I was, a little. But mostly because I genuinely didn't know what I felt. I'd spent 7 years building a life without them in it, and that life was good. I had my work, my apartment, my friends, my plants. I had a savings account and a kitchen window, and a coffee maker I actually liked. I had a therapist I'd been seeing for 2 years who had spent a considerable amount of those sessions helping me understand that I was allowed to protect myself from people who consistently made me feel small. Even if those people were family. Especially if those people were family. What I kept coming back to was my aunt's message. I miss you. Not I need something from you. Not could you help us with. Just, I miss you. It was such a small thing and I couldn't stop thinking about it. I also kept coming back to my cousin's message. No pressure. 2 words that my family had never once used with me in my entire life. I didn't know what to do with it. It felt like a door cracked open in a room I'd mostly stopped thinking about. On the 4th day, I called my therapist and told her what had happened. She listened for a long time. Then she said, "What would it mean for you if you called them back? Not for them. For you." I thought about it. I said, "I think it would mean I was willing to see who they are now, instead of only who they were." She said, "Can you tell the difference?" I said, "Not yet." She said, "That's probably where you'd need to start." I called my mother back on a Friday afternoon in December. I sat at my kitchen table with a cup of tea and my phone and I let it ring twice before she picked up. She sounded surprised. Genuinely surprised. Like she'd been expecting voicemail. And then she said my name again the way she had outside the church. Carefully. Like she was handling something she didn't want to drop. We talked for 40 minutes. I want to be honest about what that conversation was and wasn't. It wasn't a reconciliation. It wasn't the scene from the movie where everyone cries and apologizes, and everything is suddenly understood. She said she was sorry. She actually said those words, "I'm sorry, Simone, for not seeing how much you were carrying." And I believed her, or I believed that she meant it, which is almost the same thing and also not quite. There were things we didn't say. There were years we glossed over. There were questions I had that I didn't ask, because I didn't think we were ready, and probably neither of us was. What it was, honestly, was a beginning. The way a door opening is a beginning. You don't know what's on the other side yet. You just know it's open, and it wasn't before. I told her I wasn't ready to come back to Sudbury. Not yet. She said she understood. I told her I'd want to take things slowly. She said she understood that too. I told her that I needed her to know that I wasn't the same person I was at 22. That I had built something for myself, that I wasn't going to put at risk, and that the conversations we had going forward would have to be different from the conversations we'd always had. That I wasn't willing to be needed without also being valued. That those two things had to come together. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "That's fair. I think that's fair." I didn't know if she meant it. I didn't know if she knew what it would look like in practice. I still don't, not fully. What I know is that she said it, and I wrote it down in my journal afterward, because I wanted to have it in writing somewhere. Not as evidence, but as proof. Proof that the moment had happened, that someone in my family had looked at me, really looked, and said, "You're right, that should be different." I talked to my aunt separately the week after. That one was harder, she cried. I didn't, or I tried not to, but I felt it pulling at me. She said she'd spent a lot of time thinking about things she hadn't been willing to look at when she was younger. She didn't get specific, not all the way, but she said she was sorry that I had felt unseen, and she said it like she meant it. My cousin, the younger one, sent me a long text after that, very millennial, no punctuation. He said he'd had his own version of pulling away from the family, not as complete as mine, that the year after ma mère died had made him think about things differently. He said that losing her had made a lot of them realize they'd been coasting on her ability to hold the family together, without ever asking themselves what they each needed to put in. That was the thing that surprised me most, that someone else had noticed. I don't have a tidy ending to give you. I think that's important to say. I'm in contact with my mother again. We talk most Sundays, briefly, and it's careful and sometimes awkward and sometimes fine. I'm in contact with my aunt less often. I went back to Sudbury last spring for the first time since the funeral, and I stayed 2 nights at the hotel, and had dinner with my mother at a restaurant, in the new Sudbury Center. And it was strange and ordinary at the same time, the way things are when you've been away from something long enough, that you can't quite tell whether it's familiar or just recognizable. The house on Regent Street sold in February. My mother split the proceeds with my aunt, which was ma mère's wish. I didn't receive anything from the estate, which I hadn't expected and didn't ask about. Ma mère had given me what she had when she could, and I'd had it with me for 8 years. That felt like enough. There are things I'm still figuring out. Whether trust can be rebuilt after years of it being taken for granted, whether apology and change are the same thing or whether one can exist without the other. Whether I'll ever be able to sit at a Sunday dinner table without some part of me quietly counting the steps to the door. What I can say with certainty is this. The 7 years I spent in contact only with myself were not wasted. I know that in the way I couldn't have known it at 22. I know it because I can sit across from my mother at a restaurant in Sudbury and not feel small. I know it because when she said something last spring that landed wrong, something about how I'd always been so independent, said in a tone that carried just a little too much weight, I was able to say, quietly, I think what you mean is that I had to be. And she looked at me for a moment and said, yes, I think that's what I mean. That exchange used to be impossible. Now it isn't. That's not an ending. But I think it might be the beginning of something I don't have a name for yet. And for now, I'm willing to let it be unnamed. I'm willing to sit with the open door and not rush through it. I've spent enough of my life rushing into rooms other people had decided were mine. This time, I'll decide for myself. If someone who hurt you, someone who should have protected you, someone who took what you gave and called it normal. If that person called you tonight and said they were sorry, what would you need to hear after that to believe them? Tell me in the comments. I read everyone.